Hello students, today in this video I am going to talk about the structure of human brain, which is also known as encephalon. Human brain is the enlarged anterior part of the central nervous system, which is lodged in the cranial cavity or cranium of the skull. It weighs about 1.2 to 1.4 kg and it is made up of about 10,000 million neurons. Brain matter. The substance composing the brain is called the brain matter, and it is differentiated into gray matter and white matter. Gray matter, it forms the outer layer of brain. It is formed of cell bodies or cytons of neurons and non-medullated nerve fibers. Where the white matter, it lies inner to the gray matter. It is formed of medullated nerve fibers which appear white due to the presence of medullary sheath. Meninges. Brain is surrounded by three protective membranes, and these are pia mater, arachnoid and dura mater. Pia mater, it is the inner membrane which is very thin, tough and highly vascular. Arachnoid, it is the middle layer. It is also thin but non-vascular. And dura mater, it is the outer membrane. It is thick, tough and non-vascular, double layered. Spaces. There lies space between the two meninges of the brain, and these are subarachnoid space and subdural space. So first, subarachnoid space. Subarachnoid space, it is present between arachnoid and pia mater. And subdural space, it is present between dura mater and arachnoid. So in between this pia mater and arachnoid, subarachnoid space is present, and in between the arachnoid and dura mater, subdural space is mainly present. Cerebrospinal fluid. The subdural and subarachnoid spaces, these two spaces, are filled with cerebrospinal fluid, which is also called as CSF. This fluid also fills the brain cavities, which is also known as ventricles. Ventricles, each cerebral hemisphere encloses a cavity called ventricle, lateral ventricles, and lateral ventricles are connected to the third ventricle by foramen of Monro. It is one interventricular foramen, and third ventricle is connected to the fourth ventricle by aqueduct of Sylvius. The fourth ventricle is continuous with the central canal of the spinal cord. Divisions of the human brain. So the human brain or encephalon is divisible into three parts: forebrain or prosencephalon, midbrain or mesencephalon, and hindbrain or rhombencephalon. Forebrain or prosencephalon, it forms the greater part of the brain, and it consists of olfactory lobes, cerebrum and diencephalon. Olfactory lobes, these are a pair of small solid, and club-shaped bodies widely separated from each other. These are completely covered. These are completely covered with cerebral hemispheres dorsally and are visible only in the ventral view. Each olfactory lobe is differentiated into an anterior and posterior olfactory tract or bulb. Next, cerebrum. The second part of the forebrain is called as cerebrum. Cerebrum is the largest and the most prominent part of the human brain, and it constitutes about 4/5 of the total weight of the brain. And it is divisible into, or it is divided into, right cerebral hemisphere and left cerebral hemisphere. Now these two hemispheres are connected by corpus callosum, and these two hemispheres are divided by cerebral fissure. Now each cerebral hemisphere is further divided by deep fissures into 4 lobes, and these are frontal lobe, parietal lobe, temporal lobe, and occipital lobe. Frontal lobe. Now if we discuss about the structure of these lobes, first frontal lobe. Frontal lobe. It mainly concerned with the inner monitoring of complex thoughts and actions, translation of perceptions and memories into plans of muscle movement, reasoning and decision making, creative ideas, expression of emotions, willpower, and personality. Parietal lobe. It concerned with the awareness about position in space, perceiving information from environment, organizing and communication to rest of brain, receiving sensory perceptions of touch, pain, heat and cold. Temporal lobe. It is concerned with language comprehension, decoding and interpretation of sound, smell, emotion and memory. Occipital lobe. It is concerned with decoding and interpretation of visual information of objects and their shape and color. The cerebral cortex. The cerebral cortex is highly convoluted. The ridges of these convolutions are called gyri and depressions between them known as sulci. The convolutions enormously increase the surface area and the total amount of gray matter of hemispheres. Cerebral cortex is the highest center for many sensations and activities and has a number of sensory areas such as motor area, which is present in frontal lobe. It controls the voluntary movements of muscles. Premotor area, it is also present in frontal lobe. It is the highest center for involuntary movements of the muscles for autonomic neural system. Association area, it is in the frontal lobe and it controls association between various sensations and movements and is also the seat of learning. Somaesthetic area, it is mainly in the parietal lobe. So these 3 parts, these are present in the frontal lobes. And somaesthetic area, it is present in the parietal lobe. And it controls general sensations like pain, touch and temperature. Visual area, it is mainly present in the occipital lobe and it controls visual sensation. Auditory area, it is present in the temporal lobe and it mainly controls hearing. Motor speech area, it is also present in the frontal lobe. Olfactory area, it is mainly present in the temporal lobe and it controls the smell. Taste area, it lies in the parietal lobe. It lies in the parietal lobe and it controls gustation. So cerebrum, it is the seat of highest mental faculties. It governs mental abilities like thinking, reasoning, learning, memory, and intelligence. And it also controls will, emotions, and speech. Cerebrum is not only the seat of consciousness, but also exerts strong control over such reflexes as laughing and weeping. It is concerned with perception of a number of sensory stimuli and it interprets various sensations or stimuli. So this is about the cerebrum. The third part of the forebrain is known as diencephalon. It lies between the cerebrum and mesencephalon. Its cavity is called third ventricle or diocele. Its thin roof is called epithalamus. The sides thalami or thalamus. In singular we can say it is thalamus. And the floor known as hypothalamus. First, epithalamus. Epithalamus gives out a pineal stalk bearing a pineal body and it secretes hormone melatonin. Thalamus, it regulates manifestation of emotions and recognizes heat, cold and pain. Hypothalamus, it forms the floor of diocele or the cavity of the diencephalon. It is visible in the ventral view of the brain and it consists of many patches of gray matter, the hypothalamic nuclei, scattered in the white matter. This hypothalamus, it links it links neural system to endocrine system to endocrine system and exercise a regulatory control on the functioning of endocrine glands by secreting neurohormones. It contains higher centers of autonomic nervous system controlling hunger, thirst, sleep, fatigue, emotions, satisfaction, anger, pleasure. It also controls carbohydrate and fat metabolism, body temperature, homeostasis, blood pressure, and water balance. Next, midbrain, which is also called as mesencephalon. Midbrain, it is relatively small and it consists of two parts. One is called cruda cerebri or cerebral peduncle and another is known as corpora quadrigemina. So cruda cerebri or cerebral peduncles control muscle tone and modify some motor activities initiated in the cortex. Now corpora quadrigemina, these are two pairs of solid rounded swellings termed as superior colliculi and inferior colliculi. The superior and inferior colliculi of each side are termed as corpora bigemina, and of both the sides corpora quadrigemina. This superior colliculi controls visual reflexes and receives impulses from iris, eyelids, and muscles of head, whereas inferior colliculi analyzes and relays sensory information coming from the ears to the cerebrum. So this is about the midbrain. Now come to the third part, that is hindbrain, or also known as rhombencephalon. Hindbrain consists of cerebellum, pons viruli, and medulla oblongata. Cerebellum. It is the second largest part of the brain. It is located just below the posterior part of cerebrum and being partially overlapped. Like cerebrum, its upper surface is formed of grey matter and form cerebellar cortex. Cerebellum is partially divided into three lobes actually: right cerebral hemisphere, left cerebral hemisphere, and these two lobes, or these two lateral lobes, which are known as right cerebral hemisphere and left cerebral hemispheres, these are mainly connected by vermis. So this is the central part of the cerebellum. So cerebellum is partially divided into three lobes. Central part is called vermis, and two lateral lobes called right cerebral hemisphere and left cerebellar, cerebral hemisphere, but cerebellar hemisphere, right cerebellar hemisphere and left cerebellar hemispheres. Now, what is the function of this cerebellum? Cerebellum regulates and coordinates contraction of skeletal muscles. It modulates and moderates voluntary movements initiated in cerebrum. It maintains equilibrium and controls posture, and it makes body movement smooth, steady, and coordinated. Second part of the hindbrain is known as Sponse Viruli, or it is also known as pons. It lies just above the medulla. Its nerve fibers connect the two lobes of cerebellum and thus coordinate muscle movements on the sides of body. It transmits impulses from one side of the cerebellum to the other and from medulla to higher centers in the brain. It has respiratory center called pneumotaxic center that controls breathing. Third part, or the last part of the hindbrain, is known as medulla oblongata. It forms the lowermost part of the brain. It is conical in form and encloses a cavity, the fourth ventricle. In medulla oblongata, most of the sensory and motor fibers cross one side to other. Thus, the left cerebral hemisphere controls the right side of the body, and the right cerebral hemisphere controls the left side of the body. The nuclei of medulla oblongata contain vital centers such as respiratory center, cardiac center, gastric center, and vasomotor center. Reflex centers are also there, such as swallowing center, vomiting center, choking center, salivary center, respiratory center, cardiac center, urinating center, defecation center, etc. And medulla acts as a pathway conducting impulses from spinal nerves to spinal cord and then to brain. The medulla, this part, the medulla portion, the medulla, then pons viruli and midbrain and diencephalon. So the medulla oblongata, the pons viruli, the midbrain and the diencephalon part. These four parts, medulla oblongata, pons viruli, midbrain and diencephalon, are collectively called the brain stem, and all of them are hidden by cerebrum and cerebellum. So this is about the structure of the human brain and its associated components. Those are helping in the neural processes of the body. And this way our body system is mainly controlled directly by the brain. So the brain is the most important part, not only for the human but for the all kind of animals. So this is about the human brain or encephalon. Hope you like the video. Thank you very much.